American soccer fans, hello, and welcome to episode number 145 of the USA Soccer Cast. We are bringing you everything about the U.S. national teams, the players, the leagues, and everything else that impacts the game of soccer in these United States. I'm Donald Wine. As we edge closer to Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, and the end of 2024, some news broke late last week that affects how fans will be able to watch the 2027 and 2031 Women's World Cups. It was announced by FIFA on Friday that Netflix, the streaming service, has secured the exclusive broadcast rights in both English and Spanish language for the editions of the world's biggest women's tournament. That means that fans would have to subscribe to the service, which claims almost 85 million subscribers in the United States and Canada and almost 283 million subscribers worldwide. We are going to have my friend Ryan Rosenblatt on shortly to discuss all of this. He has fascinating insight on all of it, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say. While Netflix has had some other live sporting events, the 2027 and 2031 Women's World Cups are the first full tournaments acquired by Netflix. They will be charged with bringing each match to fans in the United States, and they promise on top of the actual games, star-studded studio shows, as well as documentaries that spotlight and celebrate the women's game. And from Gianni Infantino himself, he said this is, quote, a landmark moment for sports media rights. As a marquee brand and FIFA's new long-term partner, Netflix has shown a very strong level of commitment to growing women's football. This agreement sends a strong message about the real value of the FIFA Women's World Cup and the global women's game. FIFA and Netflix partnering together makes this a truly historic day for broadcasting and for women's football, end quote. Now, Netflix will have to figure out how to broadcast a live sporting event without technical issues. To date, they have had a couple of tennis exhibitions, as well as the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul boxing match that was back on November 15th. Each live event to date has experienced massive tech issues that have denied millions of people a chance to watch those sporting events. They will have two NFL games on Christmas Day, featuring a halftime performance by Beyonce that they just cannot mess up. And beginning in January, they will have WWE's Monday Night Raw every single week. So they're now on the clock to iron out all these issues that would prevent fans from watching the matches when they debut in 2027. And for fans of the women's national team, it may mean adding yet another paywalled service to the budget in order to watch their team compete for its fifth Women's World Cup title. So without further ado, I am joined by my main man, Ryan Rosenblatt. He has written for countless outlets from Stars and Stripes FC to Fox Sports. And when it comes to soccer, fewer people know more than him about all the intricacies that tie all of these things together. Ryan, my man, what's going on, dude?
I'm good. What's going on with you?
Man, I am trying to make it to the end of the year without running out of just energy. But the energy that is just kind of out there, it is. It's the holiday season. I just kind of want to relax for a little bit. But I'm glad to have you on because I think this discussion about Netflix getting the 2027-2031 Women's World Cups is a fascinating one with so many moving parts, so many things that could be involved. But I just want to start with this. Give me your general thoughts on this, because of course it takes the English and Spanish language broadcast exclusive provider for the United States, and it just start there. What do you think are your general thoughts of Netflix getting this thing for the Women's World Cup?
So I think that there's a few kind of interesting points to look at this. One, I would say is I'm not sure we have the full picture yet because when the reports started coming out about whether or not a streamer was going to get these rights, there were some reports that a streamer, if they got the rights, would then have to sublicense some games to a Fox, an ABC, a CBS, and some
Hmm.
over the air. So, if that happens, that obviously changes kind of the scope of this deal in a big way. And we haven't had any reports about that since they announced the Netflix deal. So I don't know if that's still part of it. But that's kind of one. And then the other one is I think that this deal has kind of brought into light some views that people have about women's soccer, the Women's World Cup, women's sports in general, where the idea has long been that financially various women's sports and properties need to catch up with what the men are doing. And the value of women's sports is kind of defined by their ability to create revenue. That's kind of been a huge point of it. And I I've always found that deeply flawed, from a
Hmm.
moral standpoint and also just from a sporting standpoint. But I think now you got to ask yourself, FIFA's not going with Netflix because, they just really like that distribution model. Part of the reason they're going with Netflix is presumably Netflix offered them the most amount of money. So if you've defined the worth, the value, the growth of women's sports, of women's soccer, of the Women's World Cup by its ability to generate revenue, well, what do you think now if you don't like maybe the distribution model? Because they presumably got the most amount of money. Is this not a sign of growth then that they had a gigantic company in Netflix willing to shell out real money to broadcast this? They saw the value in it. They're willing to write the check for it. I think that it's going to require some people to kind of really reconsider how they view the business of the property and of women's sports. And I think that could potentially be a really good thing because I think there are a lot of ways in which um, this sport is much better off when you take a more holistic view as opposed to letting capitalism define success or growth.
Uh, you, the reason why I brought you on is exactly that. This kind of thought process that Netflix could be good because, for long and short, they're giving the most money, so they're pumping the most money into this tournament, which could conceivably be distributed to down to the teams and the players. But as we move forward, right, like there's this whole dichotomy of streaming versus linear TV. We've seen so many people move away from cable in previous years, cutting the cord, so to speak. Netflix has almost they say they have almost 87 million people that subscribe to them in the US and Canada. Where does it kind of fit in the landscape of just soccer broadcasting? And do fans need to kind of as you say, reconfigure their thinking when we talk about how we watch and consume women's sports?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, Netflix has it's a little murky, but they have at least as many, if not more, subscribers than cable has right now. So if you're like, hey, they're on Netflix, okay, what if this whole tournament was on ESPN?
Hmm.
Guess who's like we're at that point talking about at least comparable, if not exceeding growth or reach in Netflix, and you would have from ESPN. Now we'll see if there's that ABC component or whatever else goes with that. And I think there's a real discussion to be had there about accessibility and cost of entry because nobody has to pay $1 to get NBC or ABC or CBS or Fox or whatever. So I think that is a meaningful kind of distinction there, which maybe this deal will have. Um, but for the vast majority of games that previously existed on cable, Netflix can reach as many people. Now you have to start breaking down who are those people and how many of them are soccer fans or how many soccer fans might get Netflix because of it and is that the demographic we want to reach, et cetera, et cetera. But from a pure reach standpoint, Netflix is at least equal to cable. And so they're paying a lot of money to put it on a platform that reaches as many people as ESPN. If you look at it from that standpoint, it doesn't seem terrible. And I have my qualms with this deal, but again, it comes down to I just don't really think the money matters to me and to the sport as a whole that much. And it never did. I don't feel better about women's sports because somebody paid a little bit more money for an NWL expansion team. Don't care. In a lot of those ways, just don't care.
Hmm.
I don't understand why a lot of people care. It's weird to me. And I think if they took a step back and they really broke it down, they probably wouldn't care as much either. So you get rid of that, and we'll see how it goes. Because also, this is at this point, Netflix is also going to apparently have documentaries. They're going to have shoulder programming, and they're going to build out an entire soccer operation, which they have never done before. And I think that's kind of an important thing here is Netflix has never really done large scale sports production. They've done one-offs, they've done smaller events, but they've never been like, hey, for the next 6 weeks, we have minimum four broadcast teams in English alone, and four broadcast teams in Spanish, and now two studio shows, pregame, postgame, everything about it.
Hmm.
We don't know how good Netflix is at that, and I think that most people saw kind of the difference in how ESPN treated the men's and women's World Cups versus the way that Fox treated them, what kind of impact that had on their desire to watch. How they enjoyed it, who it brought into the tent, and who it didn't. Netflix is a complete black box on that one. We do not know what they are going to do. That could be awesome. It could be not awesome. We really
Right.
don't know. And then kind of when we talk about reach and stuff like that, I think it's also important to point out I did not enjoy Fox's World Cup coverage. I think that most of my friends who watched it did not enjoy their World Cup coverage. A lot of us started watching in Spanish. Um, they drew much bigger audiences than ESPN did because at a certain point, their ability to put so many games on Fox was more important than, whether or not you liked their game coverage. And so that becomes when I talk about whether or not they're going to bring in a over the air broadcaster. That's a huge part of it too, because you could love what Netflix does, you can not like what Netflix does. You can compare Netflix to ESPN, you can do all those number of things. But if they put that thing on an over the air broadcast, and are they doing it for 4 games? Or are they doing it for 14 games or 24 games? That's going to have a huge impact on it too. So I think that when we look at this as a whole, there's a lot unknown. And it really, I think this deal in particular will force people to kind of take a step back and ask themselves, so what is it that I actually care about from a World Cup broadcast? And how do I meaningfully judge whether or not we're moving in the right direction? Because I don't think it's as simple as a lot of people make it out to be. And I think a lot of people previously had made it out to be with how much money they made and whether or not I like the faces on my TV. And those are not unimportant. But I think now you kind of got to take a step back and really ask yourself what matters the most to you or what matters the most to the sport.
I think, you were mentioning the linear TV aspect of things and whether or not they sublicense some of these games, like the final, the opener, US games, what have you, to network TV. And again, they have 2.5 years to kind of work this out. So I want to put that aside for a second. Let's focus just on Netflix for the time being. Obviously, there have been a lot of discussion about whether Netflix can do this. And the only evidence that we kind of have so far is, like you said, the one-offs that we've had, the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson fight. They're having as we speak, they're going to have two NFL games on Christmas featuring Beyonce at halftime. And people are basically like, do not mess this up. I think in January, you have the WWE Monday Night Raw is going to be the first weekly thing that they kind of do. But for all intents and purposes, for the major tournaments, this is the first one that they've acquired. And so what are the overall challenges that they have? Because I mean, from not yet being in bars and restaurants to, as you mentioned, the accessibility piece of people having to get past the paywall, whatever small paywall that may be. It's still a paywall that has not been experienced for a Women's World Cup yet. So what are some of these challenges that Netflix faces over the next 2.5 years to be ready for Brazil?
Well, I think the first one, and I would admit the one I think they're most likely to clear, is do they have the technical capability to stream this all, and so that way you're not buffering and it's not skipping and you're able to get on, because that's an issue that Netflix has had with their previous events. So they have not proven that they can do that yet. However, to your point, they do have this NFL game coming up with Beyonce at halftime. And if you really want to have an impetus to get it right, having the Bayhive want to hunt you down, really good, really good motivator. And when we talk about, like, listen, we love the World Cup, and you know what? If things are great, they may hit 25, 30 million viewers for the final in 2027 if, fingers crossed, the US makes it. Um, that is not like carrying a Super Bowl. They don't have to be able to stream this to 100 million people. They got to hit 25, 30, which is a very different, technical capability. And we've got 2+ years to get there. I think that they are going to technically be able to broadcast this relatively, issue free, similar to how Amazon has been able to do their NFL games, et cetera, et cetera. I think we're going to be okay there. But if you can't let everybody watch it cleanly, then you failed. That is still, while it is the most important step, and it is the most important step, even if I think it's a relatively small one they're likely to clear. So let's start there. You got to be able to make it so people can watch the thing. After that, yeah, you have to build out an entire apparatus to be able to do that. And I think it's a twofold thing. And it's one, can you actually get the staff and get the producers and get the camera operators and get the studio hosts and the analysts and the play-by-play person and the color, like, you got to get all that, and that's a lot of hiring. You're talking about hundreds of people you're going to have to hire, even if it is only for a short-term basis. So you have to bring all those people on, you have to get them on the same page. You have to coordinate all that. That's a huge, huge undertaking. And then the question beyond that becomes quality. And one, it becomes, I think we're going to get a real test here. And this is where, like, kind of we see women's sports treated differently. Are they actually going to send all their broadcast teams down to Brazil and let them call it from the stadium? Or are they going to put
Right.
them in a studio in LA and tell them to call it from a booth? I don't know. I have no inside information, but like, when we talk about them really shortchanging women's sports and saying, that's good enough. A new broadcaster who's never done this before and has a large technical apparatus here in the US, this is kind of the type of time when we usually see a network go, well, we can save some money or some, technical haggles by sending them down there, by not sending them down there and keeping them in studio. Let's see if they send people down there. Let's see if they send their entire studio show down there. Do they do that from LA? I don't know what they're going to do, but that's the next starting point. And then we're going to look at style and how they want to present this. Because, if you look around at other, like obviously ESPN and Fox took very different approaches towards how they broadcasted the World Cup. Fox wanted to be louder and they wanted to be edgier and they wanted to piss people off. And they did that. The ESPN wanted to do something that was more straightforward and reverential, and it looked a lot more like the Olympics.
Right.
And, how NBC broadcasts any sporting event is really different than how CBS does it, just because culturally they're very different. Amazon came in with the NFL and they decided they wanted to kind of find their own lane, and that was about having younger, recently retired players in a little more casual setting. And I think they've mostly done a good job. And whether or not you like that more than you like NBC's NFL broadcast, that's up to you. Like that's a taste issue. But they've taken kind of their own way of how they're going to approach this. We don't know what Netflix is going to do. Do they want to look like NBC? Do they want to look like ESPN, Fox, Amazon? Are they going to find their own new lane? And that's how kind of their culture and style is going to be. I think these are all questions that we don't have answers to. And I think kind of the best test, though, to see is when they start hiring people to put on camera. Um, who are they hiring? And are
Hmm.
they looking for something louder? Or are their first hires here to say to me, to you, to people who follow soccer and specifically women's soccer day in, day out, you can trust us? Are they hiring somebody that we already trust as kind of a way to burnish their own reputation and make us want to trust Netflix as an entity? I think, or are they saying, hey, we're going to do something completely different? And that might be good or that might be bad. I would personally prefer they go with the please trust us hire. But I think that's going to be the real the first tell. Are they hiring people that women's soccer fans already trust, or are they aiming for a different demographic?
Yeah, and it's interesting because there isn't a corollary to the sports that they have already done and this soccer tournament that they are going to have in 2027. It's not like they've had soccer before. It's not like they've had, really broadcast really women's sports before. They've done the documentaries, but they haven't done live sporting events featuring women. And so, like you said, is going to be a different uh, beast for them on how to approach that. And there's several ways they can take it. And I agree with you. I think make it where we kind of feel at home on a new network or a new streaming service in this case would be the idea. But there's also the accessibility thing that you touched on earlier. And one of the things that Amazon Prime has been able to do so well with the NFL, what Peacock's been able to do with soccer and college football is to be available in public, in the bars, in the restaurants. And they have reasons to be, for every bar to have Peacock and Amazon Prime every single season. Netflix does not have that yet. The Jake Paul fight was a one-off, as you mentioned. Not enough people watch WWE Monday Night Raw for it. They're not doing watch parties at bars
Right.
for WWE, but for the Women's World Cup, obviously, is the question is how do they make it where how does Netflix make it where bars and restaurants want to sign on to them and make them available in their bars, even though they only have this one tournament that's going to come every 4 years?
Yeah, I mean the way that they do it is they find their partner to do it with, and this is pretty common. It's how, Amazon and Peacock got their games, their NFL games into bars. This is how Peacock gets their Premier League games into bars. All these things that are behind a paywall, Apple does it with their MLS games. You
Right.
sign a deal with an Everpass or one of these people who have platforms that they sell to bars and restaurants, and then you sell it to them that way, and then the bar pays. we'll see what they price it at, X amount of dollars. It's usually based on size of the bar and TVs they have there. They pay that much money, and then they're not streaming anymore. They get the Netflix feed on their cable package. They're on DirecTV channel 1922, and they just
Mhm.
have to switch to that, and they're getting the Netflix feed. So I would be astounded if there's not something like that. And the real hiccup might be is if they try and charge a ton of money to bars, then maybe bars don't want to pick it up. We'll see how that goes. But that also doesn't break their model in a significant way, so I'd be surprised if they did that too. I think it probably will be pretty seamless of, hey, it looks like these other things, and all these bars are willing to pay a little bit more money to put it on TV. It's not that big of a deal. The system already exists. Other streamers have done it this way. But until they do it, we don't know. Like we know Peacock does this because they've done it. We know Amazon does this because they've done it. We don't know if Netflix does it just because it's available to them and it's, industry standard doesn't mean that they're going to do it. But I expect them to.
Is there, as we mentioned, there's a lot of time to get some of this right. Is there something that you are concerned that 2.5 years is not enough time to get ready and that they need to start thinking about large scale ramp up of a particular area?
There's nothing that I think feels like so monumental they can't do in 2.5 years. They have to do a lot of work now. Like they don't have a lot of runway. They can't kind of take their time to like assess the situation and get going. I've been pretty critical of FIFA for not putting these rights out years ago because I
Hmm.
think that like that's a huge part of it is if you're a network and it's a little bit different with Netflix, but if you're one of the other networks, you want to win those rights 5 years ago, so that way you can start selling sponsorships now. So then you know how much money you're bringing in, and that allows you to decide how much money you're willing to put into production. Because American Airlines is going to pay you this amount of money for the pregame show, and then you have to deliver this. But you know that because you have that money, that revenue coming in from American Airlines, you can spend 40% of that in production. Like that's kind of the stuff that you want to get ahead of. And this could be an issue with lining up sponsors. I mean, it's not dissimilar to the fact that FIFA has screwed over the Women's World Cup by not handing out hosting rights far enough ahead for them to line up sponsors. It's a less of a problem for TV rights, but still a problem. So you see that type of stuff that they really have to get a handle on, and we'll see who they hire to put in charge of this. Netflix does. I think they basically have to hire someone who has done this type of stuff before because there's not enough time to learn on the job. They need someone who knows exactly who to call and where the first 55 line items in their budget is. So let's see who they hire to put in charge of it. But I think that's kind of where it is. The reduced runway means they don't have time to really learn. It means that they don't have some runway to kind of be a little exploratory and start putting out feelers to, these different sponsors. And maybe we want to model it this way, which is a little bit different than how they've done it. They can't really do that now because there's not enough time if it doesn't go the way they want for them to pivot to something that's more tried and true. They kind of have to go down the tried and true path, and they need to get started right now. But go hire someone who is like intimately familiar with how this works and start laying those bricks right now. I don't think that they're going to be in a situation where they're, a month out of the World Cup and going, holy crap, we don't know what we have to do with this. We haven't answered this question. We still got to figure this out. There is enough time there to get it done, even if you would ideally have more time to, to mess around a little bit. And, if you look at kind of how ESPN handled their stuff when they were turning around the men's World Cup in 2010 and then the women in 11, part of that was they got ahead 3 years beforehand and they're like, what if this would be a good idea? And they played
Hmm.
around with it for a while, and that's how they got there. It's a bummer Netflix won't have that. They're not going to have that. Let's play around with this and see what happens. But I think they can deliver a plenty good production with the time they have. They just have to get to work yesterday.
And I think the other thing that, hopefully they don't have to run into this as much as one of the other networks is the fact of the scheduling, right? You mentioned the sponsorships, but like they don't have to worry about the other properties that they order. That documentary is not going to affect scheduling of World Cup games and things like that, or shifting around that whatever Jake Paul fight, whoever he fights next, right? They can pick another date for that. So at least there's that, and they don't have to worry about the juggling that Fox and even ESPN had to do with some of their other properties, namely football
Yep.
in the fall. But as we think about it, right? You just the Netflix versus linear TV debate. And, as I've mentioned, the Women's World Cup has been on Fox since 2015, Telemundo as well. But viewership kind of went slightly down from 15 to 19, and then from 19 to 23. 23 is mainly because of the overseas times of being in Australia and New Zealand. But do you think with Netflix having a comparable audience to that of ESPN, is there a chance that being on Netflix could help boost viewership numbers, especially for these US games that are going to probably garner the most attention?
Yeah, I think it's possible. Again, this will come back to do they find that over the air rights partner for it? If they are not, then no, it will come way down. Because even if you look at ESPN and Fox's World Cups, the ones that did by far the best viewership wasn't just the final, because that was on NBC or ABC or Fox. It was the random group stage game that on a Saturday afternoon that they put on ABC or Fox as opposed to ESPN. That's a huge part of it. And if they don't have that over the air partner, no, viewership is going to come way down. It doesn't matter who's involved. It wouldn't if Fox got the rights again and put everything on FS1, viewership's coming way down. That's just kind of how it goes. But I do think there is an opportunity there for Netflix to tap into new people who would not be as interested as they were before. Their ability to create these docudramas and these documentaries and all that type of stuff is kind of unmatched. And they tap into a culture that is not already there in women's soccer, in sports. Like that's kind of their thing is they have a different demographic. And when ESPN speaks, for the most part, the same people listen. That's kind of how it goes around the sports world. And that's not a bad thing. I am one of those people who listens. A lot of people listen to this, I'm sure, listen to that when ESPN speaks. But when Netflix speaks, different people listen. And can they produce something that is compelling enough to make those people tap in and then watch a couple games? And maybe they become diehard fans. That's an avenue that I think is absolutely there for them. And I think that we could see a lot of new fans come in that way. The question then becomes, in doing that, do you lose other fans? Or what is the opportunity cost? I don't know. It's really going to depend, and we're going to learn a lot more in the next probably year or so when we get an idea of how they're doing it. But they're absolutely going to speak to people that were not previously listening when ESPN and Fox had these properties. And that is kind of one of the exciting things about it. Now, again, you got to pull it off, and then you got to figure out a lot of other stuff. But yeah, there's absolutely a growth opportunity for this. And I think that even people who are pretty skeptical of this deal can't pretend that it's not there. We've seen Netflix do it with Formula One. We've seen a lot of other things like this that allows you to get there. I mean, that's part of the argument that Amazon has made with their NFL investment. And I think that they don't release all their numbers, so we can't see. But from what we do have and what we do know, there are people who don't genuinely watch the NFL who have been pulled in because they're in the Amazon universe. And so I think we could see some more stuff like that. And what I think is going to be especially interesting is this is a pivot for Netflix, because Netflix has kind of always hoped for, when they've talked about getting into sports and they looked at buying NBA rights or NFL rights or any number of things, they always preferred a global model. They wanted to be able to buy the rights to every country, and they wanted to distribute their sports to everyone. And that was a big reason why they pulled out of a lot of these bids, because they didn't want to. Here, they just bought the US rights. That's all it is. And so that's a change from them. And I think something that, I mean, I'm guessing here to a little bit. I don't really know, but I think it is an indication that they are looking at a more traditional model here than they have previously ever considered. So I think that might also kind of assuage some concerns that they're going to be a little too out there. I think we are seeing them come more towards a traditional broadcast sports format, but they're going to do that with a different audience. And I think that is an exciting possibility. Let's see if they deliver on it. But I could absolutely see the way in which this turns out to be a home run deal for the World Cup and for the sport, even if I don't think that's the most likely outcome.
We're going to pause here for a quick break. More with Ryan Rosenblatt after this. Hey everyone, are you looking for the latest gear for your U.S. national teams, Major League Soccer, the NWSL, or any other team in the world of soccer? The USA Soccercast has affiliate partnerships that are ready to help you out. Head to linktree.com/USA Soccercast, where we have links to Homage, Fanatics, the MLS store, and Breaking Team. You can get the jersey, shirt, hat, or accessory you're looking for to support your team. while also saving some money and helping this show in the process. Again, linktree.com/USA Soccercast. Click on the links and get your gear. And we thank you as always for your support of the show. If they don't sublicense some of these games, and I think again they have time to do it, and the hope is that they at least do again the U.S. games and maybe select games, but at least do some. But if they don't, I think the one question would be how do they cross promote it? Because like you said on Amazon, you know they have NFL games, they'll show cross promotion for other things. If you're on ESPN, you got all the MWSL promotions in baseball or in basketball or in things like that. They have the opportunity to cross promote within sports. Netflix doesn't have as big a reach in the sports world, but of course, if you're watching Squid Game, whatever season it's going to be, you'll get that, that ad for the Women's World Cup. How do they help? How do they increase I guess, the cross promotion, and how much money is that going to take, really? Because I think that's the real thing is they're going to have to spread this across a lot of different platforms.
Yeah, that just becomes a dollars issue because I mean the reason that an NBC loves the Olympics is because it's free promotion for their entire fall slate. Like that's why
Hmm.
they love the Olympics so much is you're going to watch a sitcom in October because you heard about it watching the Olympics in August. Netflix won't have that, but they can buy it. And I think that's kind of the interesting thing here because Netflix has so much money, so much money. It just becomes a question of how much are they budgeting towards this? Are they willing to spend that money? Because they've got it. It's not a huge deal to them to be able to just be like, oh, because this tournament's going to take place in the summer, and they're like, oh, we got the NBA Finals on ABC. Cool. Let's write them a $1.5 million check, and they're going to see that throughout 7 times over the course of game two. Like they
Hmm.
could just do that. Like it's not a huge deal. So that just becomes a commitment question for them. But this is where I get a little bit more optimistic. They presumably paid more money than any traditional TV property is willing to pay for the rights of this tournament. They're building out an entire production arm that they've never done before, which will be expensive. I can't imagine that they are willing to spend all of that money, but then not spend a little bit more to make sure that the casual traditional sports fan on all those other networks knows it's happening and it's happening on Netflix.
The 2027 World Cup obviously is the first one that we're going to see all this transpire and kind of see how it works. But as you know, 2031 is being bid for as we speak. The United States and Mexico are bidding for that. Should they get it, does that add to the urgency? Does it add to, I guess, a little bit of the pressure because they have to get it right for now a home soil World Cup? And again, how does it increase their production maybe for 2031 should it be on home soil?
That's a depends who is there at Netflix question because I've kind of been in these spaces before, and to some people, that is a pressure point for them. They're like, we got to crush this. We are going to have so many people watching us in 2031 that we have to put on a good face in 2027 because we're going to hear for 4 years and all these people. Our brand is being set right now in the sports world, and we have to. If they're not going to trust us in 2031 unless we do a great job in 2027. I could totally see that based on people I've worked with at these various places. You also have these other places who are like, well, it doesn't matter because they're going to want to watch the games more so than ever, and we're the only ones with the games. We
Hmm.
can throw nothing out there, and they're going to watch it. And they wouldn't necessarily be wrong about that. To be fair, like that's the thing is we talk around these studio shows and the presentation and the announcers and all these other things about it, but the reality is good game that people want to watch, people watch it. Bad game that people don't want to watch, they don't watch it. And you can put on a great production or a bad production, and the difference is infinitesimal in how many people are going to watch it. So that becomes a cultural and leadership question at Netflix. I can't answer that. I would really hope they're the former, but I've seen the latter happen.
Adding to the 2031 World Cup is I guess, the element of expansion or potential expansion. And it's been discussed more and more that the Women's World Cup could expand to 48 teams in 2031. Of course, the men's tournament is already at 48, but a lot of people feel kind of like 32 is the right number. But again, one, what are your thoughts on expanding to 48 on the women's side? But also, how does that again affect this bid by Netflix? How does it again increase production costs, or at the same time, the one thing about streaming is everyone wants multi-view, right? For that
Yeah.
last stage game where you're able to watch two games at once because they're both on at the same time. How does that all get affected by a potential tournament expansion?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't want them to. I didn't want the men to expand. I don't want the women's tournament to expand. A few reasons. One, from a just tournament, um, like logistics perspective, I think 32 is a perfect number. I would rather you go to 64 than go to 48. Having, four team groups, top two advance, a bracket that makes sense. I think there's a clarity to that I think is beautiful. I think it makes for a better tournament. I think it works for everyone. I genuinely would rather you go to 64 than 48. I think 32 is a good number because I think 64 is too many. I think 48 is too many. I also think that while we get very excited for the World Cup, and the World Cup goes a very long way to promoting the sport in the countries that make the World Cup. I'm not going to pretend that's not a thing there. I think there's also something really wonderful about World Cup qualifying, and I think when you devalue World Cup qualifying, you are really hurting to some degree the soul and the soul of the sport and how this is supposed to function, and also an entry point there because let's be honest, the vast majority of people are never going to go to a World Cup game because it's either never going to come to the country, they can't afford it, any number of things. I think taking away really meaningful games that lead up to the World Cup and qualify you there, I think taking those away from host countries because, if you have a country that is, like we can look at Germany, like I think it's so important that Germany plays important World Cup qualifiers in Germany and
Hmm.
people get to go to that and you develop a culture around that. And that is a huge part of where the culture of that national team in that sport is developed. If Germany's going to qualify so easily every time because so many teams are going to the World Cup, those games don't matter that much. The stakes aren't there. The culture is not there. You want those games on home soil to matter. And I don't, I mean, I understand why, because corruption's a hell of a drug, but I also don't understand on the men's side why so many federations who voted for the expanded World Cup were willing to give away the most valuable games that they have on their soil. That's what they did. And I would hate to see the women do the same thing because, I would love for CONCACAF to continue growing and the U.S. have to play some real deal qualifiers on home soil. I want them to go play. Instead of having that one off tournament that they have, I want the U.S. women to go play a game in Guatemala or go play a game in Jamaica and have it be like, no, this is a World Cup qualifier. That mattered. Like, imagine how much that would go towards growing the sport in those countries and making the people in that country want to show up and develop a culture around it. The same way I think the U.S. women's national team culture would be better off if we were hosting real deal World Cup qualifiers. The rest of the world does have that in various degrees. I want it to stay at 32 because I want to see the culture around qualifying grow. So there's that. I don't want it to grow. Logistically, I think it's a lot harder. And one of the big reasons I don't want it from a logistics standpoint to expand is you get to 48 teams and you get to that many more matches, you are now really limiting the number of countries that could host. Um, because they don't have that many stadiums. They can't do
Hmm.
all these various things. 32, I think, is a good number of hosts. You could do it with as few as 8 city stadiums hosting. And I think that allows you to go into a lot more countries. Like, Morocco could host a women's World Cup at 32. I don't think Morocco could host a World Cup at 38 or at 48. I
Hmm.
think that just gets too big for them. Now you're trying to co-host. Then you have so many other things going on, and I don't really like co-hosting for a number of reasons unless it's necessary, and I don't want to make it necessary for them. So, for a lot of reasons like that, I think the sport would be really poorly served by 48. I think the men are poorly served by 38. I think the women would be even more poorly served by 48.
So the last question I have for you, and again, getting back to Netflix and putting everything together, when we think about the Women's World Cup, we think about some of the best games that we've seen, on the women's side, especially for the U.S. women. We remember those moments from '99, from 2015, from 2019. We remember where we were. We remember how we were watching. We remember who we were watching it with. 2019, we were together, first,
That was right next
front
to you.
row, right
It
next to
was
me, front
great.
row.
It
It
was
was
great.
great. Can Netflix can Netflix build some of those moments? And of course, it obviously depends, at least for American fans or whoever fan you are, if your team wins. But can Netflix develop some of those "I was there" moments, or "I was at this bar, or at this restaurant, or at this, Brandenburg Gate in Germany watching the Women's World Cup"? Are they going to be able to bring those moments to you through a paywall? And yes, again, however small that paywall may be, however many people may already have it, are they able to create those moments? And is that something that should be thought about as they approach this?
I think they unquestionably can. And, if we're going to assume that they're not going to sub-license out some of these games and it's truly just up to them, now they have a much bigger lift to do that. Because part of what makes that, like, let's go to 2019 and let's say we won't even go all the way to the final. Let's say we're talking about just the quarterfinal against France. Let's call that
Hmm.
the pinnacle of moment building. Um, because they're playing the host country, because that's a heavyweight fight between two of probably the two favorites to win the tournament. And Megan Rapinoe has her moment, and that image is etched into history. Like all those things. It didn't just happen because they were good at soccer and because they played in France and because the stadium was sold up and because Megan Rapinoe was really good and scored a goal. Like part of the reason it felt so grand is because of what built up to that. And it was the ability to develop those storylines before the tournament even started. And then it was the ability to keep telling that story as the tournament's going. And you see Megan Rapinoe playing better, and you see France playing really well. And you're getting these shots from outside of France games in the group stage, and you're seeing the way the country is buying into this women's national team for the first time. And then you start talking about the history between the two countries, and can France get past a quarterfinal finally? And these are all the things that you're maybe not thinking about when you're watching that quarterfinal, but it all makes that moment bigger because a game on its own is just a game. It's this narrative and this storytelling and this buildup that makes it that. And so when we look at how that happened, it's not just the fact that, like, yeah, the US games were on Fox, over the air Fox, and had a large viewership. That's part of it. It's also how they talked about it. It's also how, because people were talking about it, they were talking about it on Good Morning America, who
Hmm.
was otherwise not talking about that. It's how they were, talking with the president, a thing that would not have been coming if it wasn't for that, or talking against the president because they, had some sense. And all those things are helping to build up to that moment. And some of that is earned and some of it isn't. And some of it is just, Nike saw they had a moment, they spent a ton of money. Dope. But like they have to see that when they decide, we have budgeted this amount of money to spend on the World Cup. Well, now we have more opportunity. Let's spend a little bit more money. So I think it's all those things come together. And so for Netflix, the question is going to be, how do we get to that point where we cannot where it's not just what we're doing? And I think they are going to do a good job with those documentaries. So I think you're really going to understand a lot of the players from the US and elsewhere in what motivates them, where they came from. You're going to have those stories the same way we knew about where Megan Rapinoe came from, the same way that we knew about, where Abby Dahlkemper came from, and the same way we knew where Crystal Dunn came. Like we know all those things, but like that's work. And I think Netflix will do a really good job of that. I also think they're going to do a really good job of kind of diving into the history and the culture around the team, which I think will help. But they can't do it all on their own. So the question becomes whether that is by spending money, whether that is by just a really good PR campaign, whether that is by sub-licensing games, whether it is by, I mean, a big part of this too is you get highlight rights when you get the rights. And then
Hmm.
it's less so now, but especially back in the day, but it still exists. Licensing out those highlight rights. Like how many minutes of highlights to World Cup games does Netflix allow ESPN to use on SportsCenter? That's like the thing you wouldn't think about, but it makes a huge difference. And so those are all choices they're going to have to make because Netflix can only go so far here. They need ESPN to talk about this. They need to have it on First Take. They need to have someone on Good Morning America. They need to have Nike spending money. They need to have all these things. And so how do they get the culture as a whole to buy into this tournament and develop that excitement and create that build and tell some of those stories? That's going to be, I think, the biggest hurdle for Netflix is how can they make this matter outside of their ecosystem? And spending money is a good way, but it's going to take a lot more than that. And a sub license would go a long way because if you sub license that with Fox, Well, now Fox has a reason to talk about it. Like ESPN would have a reason if they do it with ABC Disney. Like they can do that stuff. Um, do it with CBS. They'll talk about it on Galazzo. I mean, they'll talk about it on Galazzo regardless, but
Hmm.
Galazzo might start sending people there. You give them unlimited highlights. Now you're building out entire shows around it. Because I mean, those are the questions that Netflix has to ask themselves. What are we giving up to be able to get other people involved? Because they cannot do it alone. ESPN had the entire Disney court behind it, and they didn't do it alone. Fox had Fox court behind it. They couldn't do it alone. Netflix, you're big. You got a big ass bank account and you can write some checks. You're not gonna do it alone. And they know that. Like I'm not saying anything, particularly revelatory. How are they going to get other people to talk about it? Because this requires an entire ecosystem, not just a single company.
It, I mean, they've created viral moments in movies, TV shows,
Yep.
documentaries. The hope is that they can build this out, and maybe again through some of the documentaries that you were mentioning, kind of build into these moments that we're surely going to have in 2027,
And
2031.
that's what makes it different though, is like we talked about. They've done it around a movie and the memes go around, but the memes die.
Right.
They've done it around a single boxing fight, but then it ends.
Hmm.
They're going to have to build this. They're going to have to build probably, if I want to be conservative, a 90-day buildup and then roughly a 38-day event of everyday coverage, everyday buzz, everyday storytelling. They've never done this. They've never come close to it. They've never tried. They have shown that they can do a lot of really impressive things and break into the zeitgeist and matter culturally. Like no one can take that away from Netflix, but they've never directed that all towards one thing over a long period of time. This is going to be their first foray into it, and that's where, they're going to have to take those skills and really stretch them in ways they've never done before.
We could talk about this all day. This has been fascinating. Before we get out of here, tell everybody where they can find you and your excellent work that you're doing.
I you probably don't want to find me, but if you do, I don't know where I am now. I have a Substack that I don't know. It's called Think Outside the Ball, which I'm going to start writing with regularity in the new year. And you could find me on ESPN.com sometimes, and you can find me probably at your local crappy soccer game, which is my favorite place to hang out.
And eating Dodger dogs in the Dodger dog section, which I have tried and failed to keep up with this man, Ryan Rosenblatt. Don't jump with him when it comes to that. But I'm glad you're able to do this. Happy Hanukkah to you. Happy holidays, and I'm sure we'll be talking about college basketball and football and everything else very very soon.
Appreciate you always, my man.
Yeah, man. And thanks so much to Ryan Rosenblatt for joining me and providing just incredible insight into this Netflix deal and how it can affect the growth of the game. There is a lot of work that Netflix has to do between now and the 2027 World Cup in Brazil. And as fans, we just got to keep them pushing towards increasing the accessibility of the game and getting as many eyeballs as possible on the matches. They got 2.5 years to get it right. And while we have our concerns, we just know they need to get to work. And Ryan has provided me with a little bit more optimism as to how this could work and how Netflix could bring it all together and provide a great, great presentation for these next two Women's World Cups that are coming up. That will do it for episode 145 of the USA Soccer Cast. Thank you so much for listening. Remember to follow us on Blue Sky, Twitter, and we are on YouTube as well. Find us on all of those platforms at USA Soccer Cast. Subscribe, rate, and review our episodes. It really helps and is greatly appreciated. Don't forget, we have affiliate programs with a ton of places to get you the gear you love and help you travel to see your favorite teams play or watch them from the comfort of your home. Head to our Linktree, linktree.com/USA Soccercast to learn more. Click the links to all of these sites and our stimulus store and support the show in the process. Have a very Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, a Happy Kwanzaa, and a Happy Boxing Day. And we will talk to you all again soon.